The massive German Shepherd lunged forward, its powerful jaws closing around Emily's slender arm. Her father, Robert, screamed, lurching forward despite the guide's restraining grip. Time seemed to freeze in that terrible moment, the wild gleam in the dog's eyes, Emily's pale face, the horrified onlookers. Everyone had warned them this would happen. The rehabilitation center staff, the wildlife experts, even her own brother had pleaded, "He's not your pet anymore. He's wild. He'll tear you apart." 10 years in the wilderness had transformed the puppy she'd raised into this formidable creature. As Max's grip tightened, tears spilled down Emily's cheeks. Not tears of pain, but of something else entirely, something no one watching could possibly understand. The bond between them had survived a decade of separation, but what happened next would shatter everything they thought they knew about the divide between humans and animals. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The Thompson family home sat nestled against the edge of the sprawling Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia, its weathered wooden exterior bearing witness to 3 generations of family history. For Emily Thompson, the old farmhouse and its surrounding 60 acres represented more than just a home, it was her sanctuary. Born with mild autism that made the chaotic world of her peers overwhelming, 8-year-old Emily found peace in the rhythmic routines of caring for animals. Her wide blue eyes, framed by unruly blonde curls, often seemed to look through people rather than at them, but when she gazed at an animal in need, they focused with remarkable clarity and compassion. Emily's father, Robert Thompson, had founded the Thompson Animal Rescue Foundation 5 years earlier, following the death of his wife Claire from an aggressive cancer. A former veterinarian with deep smile lines etched into his tanned face, Robert had transformed their family property into a rehabilitation center for injured wildlife and abandoned domestic animals, channeling his grief into creating a legacy that honored Claire's lifelong passion for animal welfare. The foundation specialized in rehabilitating animals for release back into protected wilderness areas when possible, operating on the philosophy that every creature deserved a chance to live according to its natural instincts. While the foundation accepted all animals in need, German Shepherds had become their unofficial specialty, as Claire had bred championship lines before her illness. Emily's older brother Michael, 14 and fiercely protective, helped with the administrative side of the foundation, his practical nature providing a counterbalance to his father's idealism. Unlike Emily, Michael viewed the animals with respectful detachment, understanding their importance but cautious about forming emotional bonds with creatures destined to leave. Among the dozens of animals that passed through the Thompson property, none would impact their lives like Max, a German Shepherd puppy discovered half drowned in a drainage ditch after the historic floods of 2005. With intelligent amber eyes and oversized paws that hinted at his future size, Max arrived at a pivotal moment in Emily's development. No one could have predicted how profoundly their lives would intertwine, nor the extraordinary journey that would eventually lead them back to each other against impossible odds. The Thompson family first noticed Emily was different shortly after her 3rd birthday. While other children her age babbled excitedly and sought out playmates, Emily remained largely silent, preferring to observe the world from a careful distance. Robert and Claire initially attributed her quietness to a thoughtful personality, but when Emily began kindergarten, her teacher gently suggested they consult a specialist. The diagnosis came during a rainy afternoon appointment: mild autism spectrum disorder. The clinical words seemed inadequate to describe their vibrant, sensitive daughter, but they provided a framework to understand her struggles. "She experiences the world differently," Dr. Marshall explained, his kind eyes meeting Robert's worried gaze. "Sounds, lights, and social interactions that seem normal to us can be overwhelming for Emily. That's why she withdraws." For Emily, school became a daily battlefield of fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry insects, the cacophony of children's voices that felt like physical blows, and social rules that made no logical sense to her. Each day she'd return home exhausted, retreating to her room or wandering the property's edge alone. Claire had homeschooled her for months before her final hospitalization, but after Claire's death, Robert had reluctantly sent Emily back to school, but believing structure would help them both cope with their grief. Instead, Emily's isolation deepened. Children can be instinctively cruel to those who are different, and Emily's classmates were no exception. They called her weird and robot girl for her formal speech patterns and lack of emotional expression. During recess, she'd sit alone beneath an old oak tree, watching ants march in organized lines and wishing she could make sense of human interactions as easily as she understood the ants' purposeful movements. "Dad, why don't they like me?" she asked one evening, her voice flat but her fingers twisting anxiously in her lap. "I tried to follow the rules." Robert's heart broke at the genuine confusion in her question. "Sometimes people don't understand those who see the world differently," he explained, pulling her close. "But that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with your way of seeing." The only place Emily truly came alive was among the rescue animals. Unlike humans, animals didn't expect her to make eye contact or understand subtle social cues. They responded to direct, gentle handling and clear communication, areas where Emily excelled. Robert noticed how she meticulously observed each animal's behavior, creating detailed charts tracking their healing progress with a precision that impressed even veteran veterinarians who volunteered at the foundation. Yet, despite her affinity for animals, Emily remained selective about which ones she approached. Loud, unpredictable creatures caused her the same distress as chaotic human environments. She gravitated toward the calm, injured songbirds and elderly cats, quiet companions that matched her contemplative nature. Her emotional detachment, which worried her teachers at school, seemed an advantage in the rehabilitation center, allowing her to assist with treatments that might distress more sensitive children. By her 8th birthday, Emily had become a fixture at the foundation, silently moving between enclosures with a maturity that belied her age. The animals responded to her calm, deliberate movements, and Robert began to hope that perhaps, through her work with them, Emily might eventually find a bridge to connect with people too. The spring of 2005 brought historic rainfall to the Blue Ridge foothills. 3 days of relentless downpours transformed gentle streams into raging torrents, washing away roads and flooding low-lying areas. The Thompson Animal Rescue Foundation became an impromptu emergency shelter, taking in pets separated from evacuated families and wildlife displaced by rising waters. On the 4th morning, as the rain finally subsided, the emergency call center received a call from elderly Mrs. Eleanor Jenkins, whose property bordered a normally dry ravine now transformed into a churning waterway. "There's something alive down in the drainage culvert," her wavering voice reported. "I can hear whimpering, but I can't get down there with my bad hip." Robert and Michael responded immediately, navigating muddy back roads in their rescue truck. They found Mrs. Jenkins standing anxiously at the edge of her property, pointing toward a concrete drainage pipe half submerged in turbulent, debris-filled water. "I heard it just before I called you," she said, clutching a worn cardigan around her thin shoulders. "Sounded like a puppy, poor thing." Robert approached the culvert cautiously, aware of the dangerous current. Peering inside, he saw nothing at first, then caught a glimpse of movement, a small, dark shape pressed against the concrete wall, trembling as water rushed past. "There's definitely something in there," he confirmed, already removing his boots and jacket. "Michael, get the rescue kit and extension pole from the truck." With Michael anchoring a safety line, Robert waded into the frigid, waist-deep water. The current threatened to sweep him off his feet as he inched toward the drainage pipe, using the extension pole for balance. Inside the pipe, the whimpering had grown fainter, a bad sign. "Hang on, little one," Robert called, his voice echoing in the concrete chamber. "We're coming." Reaching into the darkness, his hand connected with wet fur. The creature flinched, then went still. As gently as possible, Robert wrapped his fingers around what felt like a small torso and pulled the animal toward him. Emerging into daylight was a German Shepherd puppy, no more than 8 weeks old, its black and tan coat plastered against an alarmingly thin frame. "He's alive," Robert announced, cradling the limp body against his chest as Michael helped them to solid ground. "But just barely." Mrs. Jenkins insisted on accompanying them back to the foundation. My Harold bred German shepherds for the police department for 30 years before he passed, she explained as they drove. This little one, he looks just like their best stud dog. Someone dumped a purebred pup or he got swept away from a breeder upstream. At the rehabilitation center, Robert worked quickly to raise the puppy's body temperature while Michael administered subcutaneous fluids. For hours, they weren't sure if the puppy would survive. His breathing remained shallow, his gums pale from blood loss where a deep gash crossed his hind leg. Emily had been helping with the smaller rescued animals in another building but returned to the main center as evening approached. She stood silently in the doorway of the treatment room, watching the emergency intervention with unusual intensity. "What's his name?" she finally asked, startling Robert, who hadn't noticed her arrival. "He doesn't have one yet, sweetheart," Robert answered, continuing his work. "We're just trying to keep him alive right now." Emily approached the examination table slowly, her head tilted as she studied the puppy's face. "He has brave eyes," she observed, "like the pictures of astronauts going to space even though it's dangerous." Robert smiled despite his exhaustion. "You're right. He is brave to have survived that flood." "His name is Max," Emily announced with uncharacteristic certainty. "It means greatest. He had to be the greatest to survive when the water tried to take him away." Mrs. Jenkins nodded approvingly. "Maximum effort, maximum heart. It suits him." That night, against protocol that required critical cases to remain in the monitored recovery ward, Emily set up a sleeping bag beside Max's incubator. For once, Robert didn't have the heart to enforce the rules. Something in his daughter's determined expression told him this animal mattered in a way the others hadn't. Over the next weeks, Max's physical recovery progressed rapidly, but it was his emotional transformation that astonished everyone at the foundation. The terrified, half-drowned puppy blossomed into a confident, intelligent companion under Emily's constant care. Where other rescued animals eventually distributed their attention among all the humans who cared for them, Max remained singularly devoted to Emily. "It's like they speak a private language," Michael observed one morning, watching Emily and Max move in synchronized patterns through the sanctuary's grounds. No commands were audible, yet the puppy anticipated her movements perfectly, adjusting his pace to match hers, stopping when she stopped, responding to subtle shifts in her posture that even Robert couldn't detect. Dr. Sarah Williams, the Foundation's consulting veterinary behaviorist, developed a particular interest in their bond. "I've worked with service dogs trained from birth to anticipate their handlers' needs, and I've never seen this level of intuitive connection," she confessed to Robert. "It's as though Max can read Emily's emotional state in ways we can't." The most remarkable change occurred in Emily herself. With Max at her side, she began speaking more frequently, first to the dog, then gradually to the people around her. The formal, stilted quality of her speech relaxed into something more natural. She made eye contact more often, and her face, normally expressionless, occasionally broke into spontaneous smiles when Max performed his increasingly complex repertoire of self-taught tricks. Robert adjusted the foundation schedule to allow Emily to take primary responsibility for Max's care and training. Every morning they completed a thorough check of his healing wounds together, and Emily meticulously recording his progress in a spiral notebook decorated with carefully drawn paw prints. Afternoons were spent on basic training exercises, which Emily researched extensively, creating elaborate training plans that impressed even the professional handlers who occasionally volunteered at the sanctuary. By summer's end, something extraordinary had happened. Emily, who had previously required extensive preparation for any change in routine, began suggesting trips to nearby parks where she and Max could practice their training in different environments. The child, who had once been overwhelmed by unexpected sounds, now navigated busy hiking trails with Max walking attentively at her side. "He makes the world quieter for me," she explained when Robert expressed amazement at her newfound adaptability. "When things get too loud or confusing, I look at Max, and he helps me remember how to breathe properly again." At night, though technically against the rules, Max slept at the foot of Emily's bed, his presence seeming to ward off the nightmares that had plagued her since her mother's death. On the rare occasions when thunder, previously a trigger for hours of distress, rolled across the mountains, Emily would bury her fingers in Max's fur, focusing on his steady heartbeat rather than the chaotic sounds outside. The transformation extended to Emily's school life as well. With special permission, Max began accompanying Emily to classes twice weekly as a therapeutic support animal. Her teachers reported remarkable improvements in her social engagement and academic participation. For the first time, other children approached Emily, drawn initially by the handsome dog but staying to interact with the quiet girl who could make him perform impressive tricks. "He's a bridge," Robert realized, watching Emily explain Max's training techniques to a circle of fascinated classmates. "He's connecting her to parts of the world she couldn't access before." Even Michael, initially skeptical about the wisdom of allowing his sister to become so attached to an animal that would eventually be placed for adoption, but had to acknowledge the profound change in Emily. "I've never seen her smile like that," he admitted, watching Emily laugh openly as Max pranced around the yard with a training dummy. "It's like he's helping her find herself." By Max's first birthday, the bond between dog and girl had become the stuff of local legend. Visitors to the sanctuary often requested special demonstrations of their intuitive communication, and a regional newspaper featured them in a human interest story about the healing power of animal companionship. What no one realized, not even Robert, was that the Foundation's central mission was about to put this extraordinary relationship to a heartbreaking test. The Thompson Animal Rescue Foundation had always maintained a delicate balance between public engagement and the privacy needed for effective rehabilitation work. This balance shattered one crisp autumn morning when a documentary crew arrived to film a segment about successful animal rehabilitation centers in the Southeast, but Robert had agreed to the coverage, hoping it might encourage donations and support for their expanding operation. The producer had promised a thoughtful piece highlighting their commitment to returning animals to their natural habitats when possible. "We just want to capture the daily routines, the success stories," the director, Patricia Wilson, explained as her crew set up equipment around the property. "Authentic moments that show the impact of your work." Robert gave them a thorough tour, introducing the various wildlife cases currently under treatment and explaining the Foundation's rehabilitation philosophy. The crew seemed particularly captivated by the large canine enclosure where several rescued German shepherds, including Max, lived together as a small pack when not in individual training sessions. "The socialization is critical," Robert explained, "especially for dogs that might eventually return to quasi-wild environments. They need to understand pack dynamics." When Emily arrived after school, she headed straight for the enclosure as she did every day. Without hesitation, she slipped through the safety gate and was immediately surrounded by 4 full-grown German shepherds, all wagging their tails enthusiastically. Max pushed ahead of the others, pressing against her legs with obvious affection. Emily knelt among them, seemingly unconcerned as the powerful animals jostled around her small frame. The camera crew rushed to capture the moment, entranced by the striking visual of the small girl sitting calmly among the massive dogs. Emily, absorbed in her usual routine with Max, barely registered their presence. She led the dogs through an advanced training sequence, demonstrating the progress of their rehabilitation. For 10 minutes, everything proceeded perfectly, showcasing the remarkable control and communication she had developed. Then came the moment that would haunt the Thompson family for years. Rex, one of the newer rescues with a history of abuse, became startled when a sound technician accidentally dropped a metal equipment case. The dog's traumatic past triggered an immediate defensive response. He spun around, hackles raised, a deep growl rumbling from his chest as he positioned himself between Emily and the perceived threat. The camera captured every second Rex's defensive posture, the other dog's immediate alertness, and most damning of all, Emily's apparent obliviousness to the danger as she calmly placed her hand on Rex's back and whispered something in his ear. Within seconds, Rex relaxed, the moment passed, and Emily continued her training session as if nothing had happened. To Emily and Robert, it was a testament to her extraordinary ability to communicate with the animals. To the documentary crew and later, to millions of viewers, it was a horrifying near miss that showcased irresponsible adult supervision. When the documentary aired 3 weeks later, it included a dramatically edited segment titled "Playing with Fire: The Dangerous Reality of Animal Rehabilitation." The footage of Emily in the enclosure had been cut to emphasize moments of perceived danger, but with slow-motion replays of Rex's defensive posture and ominous music underscoring the narrator's grave warning about the unpredictability of traumatized animals. While the Thompson Foundation does important work, the narrator intoned over footage of Emily surrounded by the German Shepherds. Experts question the wisdom of allowing a child this level of access to potentially dangerous animals. One wrong move, one unexpected trigger, and this heartwarming scene could turn tragic in seconds. The fallout was immediate and overwhelming. Local news stations picked up the story, and soon national outlets followed. Animal behavior experts who had never visited the foundation offered harsh assessments of the practices shown in the documentary. Child Protective Services contacted Robert for an evaluation, and the foundation's insurance company threatened to cancel their policy unless significant safety measures were implemented immediately. "We've received dozens of complaints," the county inspector explained during an emergency site visit. "People are concerned about the child's welfare." Robert tried desperately to explain the context, Emily's unique abilities with the animals, the extensive training both she and the dogs had undergone, and the carefully controlled environment that the documentary had misrepresented. "She understands these animals in ways most adults never will," he insisted. What looked like a dangerous moment was actually Emily demonstrating exactly how to diffuse canine anxiety. His explanations fell on deaf ears. The public had seen what appeared to be a small girl in imminent danger, and the outcry demanded action. The foundation was given an ultimatum: implement strict safety protocols separating Emily from direct contact with the larger animals or face closure. The new safety measures transformed the foundation almost overnight. Glass barriers were installed around the canine enclosures, allowing observation without direct contact. Emily could no longer enter the shared spaces freely. All interactions had to be supervised by at least 2 adults, with protective equipment readily available. Max, who had slept in Emily's room since his rescue, was now required to remain in the rehabilitation kennels with the other dogs. For Emily, who had thrived on her tactile connection with the animals, the changes were devastating. The routines that had structured her days and given her confidence vanished, replaced by sterile, regulated interactions that felt hollow and insufficient. The first morning after the new protocols were implemented, she stood outside the glass barrier, watching Max pace anxiously on the other side. When he pressed his nose against the partition, she placed her palm against the cold surface, their connection reduced to a barrier between them. "He doesn't understand why I won't come in," she told Robert, her voice flat with suppressed emotion. "He thinks he did something wrong." Robert knelt beside her, his own heart breaking at the situation. "I know this is hard, sweetheart. We're working to find a better solution, but for now we have to follow these rules." "The rules are stupid," Emily replied with uncharacteristic vehemence. "Max would never hurt me. None of them would." Dr. Williams, the behavioral specialist who had documented Emily's remarkable progress with the dogs, advocated fiercely on her behalf, preparing detailed reports on the therapeutic benefits of her animal interactions and the methodical safety precautions the family had always observed. But the foundation's board members, rattled by the public scrutiny and legal threats, remained firm in their decision. "We can't risk another incident," the board chairman explained during a tense meeting. "The liability is too great." In the following weeks, Emily's behavior regressed dramatically. She stopped speaking almost entirely, responding to questions with minimal gestures or single-word answers. At school, she withdrew from the social connections she had begun to form, returning to her isolated corner during recess. Her teachers reported a sharp decline in class participation and increasing incidents of anxiety-related behaviors. Most concerning to Robert was her refusal to visit the Foundation facilities at all. After the initial shock of the new restrictions, Emily simply stopped going to the rehabilitation center after school. Instead, she would sit at the edge of the property, just close enough that Max, who seemed to understand exactly where the boundary lay, could watch her from the exercise yard. They would remain that way for hours, separated by 50 yards of open ground and an insurmountable barrier of rules and fear. At night, Robert would find Emily huddled under her blanket, silent tears soaking her pillow. When he tried to comfort her, she turned away, curling around the stuffed German Shepherd toy that had been a poor substitute for Max's warm presence. "He must think I abandoned him," she whispered one night, breaking her silence. "Dogs don't understand rules or laws. They just understand when someone they love stops coming." Robert's attempts to arrange special supervised sessions met with limited success. The formality of the interactions Emily required to wear protective gear, handlers positioned nearby with catch poles, destroyed the natural communication that had made their bond so special. Max sensed the tension and behaved differently, more subdued and cautious, which only increased Emily's distress. After one particularly difficult session, when Max had barely approached her, Emily made a devastating declaration. "I don't want to see him like this anymore," she said, removing the heavy protective gloves. "It's worse than not seeing him at all. It makes him sad, and it makes me sad." Dr. Williams warned Robert that forcing artificial interactions might cause more psychological harm than the separation itself. "She's experiencing a profound grief," she explained. "The relationship she valued most has been fundamentally altered, and these supervised sessions only emphasize what's been lost." For 3 months, the impasse continued. Emily grew increasingly withdrawn, and Max's behavior deteriorated as well. Once the star pupil of their rehabilitation program, he now showed signs of depression, reduced appetite, lethargy, and disinterest in training activities. The other handlers couldn't motivate him the way Emily had, and his progress stalled. Every evening, Emily would stand at her bedroom window, watching the lights of the kennel building where Max slept. Sometimes, in the stillness of dusk, his lonely howl would drift across the property, a sound so plaintive it brought tears to even Michael's eyes. "We're hurting them both," Michael admitted one night, watching his sister's silhouette at the window. "There has to be another solution." The Foundation's board called an emergency meeting 6 months after implementing the safety protocols. Despite their best efforts, the situation had become untenable. Max's rehabilitation had regressed significantly, and his increasing agitation made him unsuitable for eventual adoption. Emily's therapist had reported concerning symptoms of depression and recommended immediate intervention to address her emotional decline. "We have 2 casualties of our policy," Robert stated bluntly to the assembled board members. "A child whose emotional well-being is collapsing and a dog whose rehabilitation has been sabotaged. Neither outcome aligns with our mission." After hours of tense discussion, Dr. Williams presented an unexpected proposal. Max, along with Rex and 2 other shepherds from the same rehabilitation group, could be candidates for the Foundation's wilderness release program at the Blue Ridge Wildlife Preserve. "They formed a stable pack structure," she explained, displaying behavioral assessments and training records. "Max, in particular, has shown exceptional adaptability and intelligence. In the controlled wilderness setting, they could live semi-wild but protected lives, fulfilling our mission of returning rehabilitated animals to appropriate natural environments when possible." The proposal sparked immediate controversy. Some board members argued that German Shepherds, as a domesticated breed, weren't suitable candidates for wilderness release. Others countered that the preserve's unique structure of vast protected territory, where released animals received periodic monitoring and supplemental feeding during harsh conditions, offered an appropriate middle ground between captivity and true wilderness. "This pack has formed a family unit," Dr. Williams continued. "They hunt together in training simulations, defend their territory appropriately, and maintain the social structures they would need to survive. The preserve has successfully integrated similar canines before." The most contentious aspect of the proposal was what it meant for Emily. Once Max was relocated to the preserve, nearly 300 miles away, their separation would become permanent. Visitors were strictly limited to minimize human impact on the rehabilitated animals. Robert agonized over the decision. Relocating Max might give the dog a chance at a fulfilling life suited to his natural instincts, but it would cement the loss Emily had been struggling to accept. Yet keeping him at the foundation, watching his spirit diminish behind glass barriers, seemed equally cruel. The decision ultimately came from an unexpected source. Michael, who had been researching the preserve extensively, requested permission to address the board. "My sister loves Max," he began, his teenage voice cracking slightly with emotion. "She loves him enough to have spent hours researching what would be best for him, not just what would make her happy." He distributed folders containing Emily's meticulous notes about canine pack behavior and wilderness adaptation. "She asked me to share these with you. She believes Max belongs at the preserve, even though it means saying goodbye." When Robert returned home that evening, he found Emily waiting for him, her face pale but composed. "Michael told you what I think," she said simply. Robert nodded, sitting beside her on the porch swing. "Are you sure, sweetheart? Once he goes to the preserve, the rules say we can't visit regularly. It might be years before you could see him again, if ever." Emily's small hand found his, squeezing with surprising strength. "I looked up what rehabilitation means. It means to restore to a condition of health or useful and constructive activity. Max can't be healthy behind glass, and I can't make him happy with visits that just confuse him." Her voice wavered slightly before steadying again. "The preserve will let him be a real dog, the way he's supposed to be." The wisdom in her words humbled Robert. At 9 years old, Emily had grasped the Foundation's core mission more deeply than many adults, understanding that true compassion sometimes meant letting go. The preparations for the relocation moved quickly. 4 German shepherds, Max, Rex, and 2 females named Stella and Luna, were selected for the preserve program. For 2 weeks, they underwent intensive training simulations designed to prepare them for wilderness conditions, with particular emphasis on pack hunting techniques and territory defense. Emily insisted on being part of the preparation process, though she maintained a careful distance, observing through the glass barriers. She documented every session in her notebook, her face solemn as she watched Max master each new skill. At night, she researched the Blue Ridge Wildlife Preserve obsessively, memorizing its topography and climate patterns as if the knowledge might somehow keep her connected to Max after he was gone. The day before the scheduled transport, Dr. Williams bent the rules for one final supervised interaction. In a secure enclosure with safety equipment discreetly positioned but out of immediate sight, Emily was allowed 15 minutes with Max. The dog's joy at being reunited with her was palpable. He pressed against her, whining softly, his entire body quivering with happiness. Emily knelt beside him, her arms around his neck, whispering words only he could hear. When the time ended, she stood without protest, walking steadily to the gate without looking back, though her small shoulders shook with silent sobs. At dawn the next morning, all 4 dogs were loaded into specially designed transport crates for the journey to the preserve. Emily stood at her bedroom window, watching the Foundation's van disappear down the long driveway, taking Max away from her forever, or so everyone believed at the time. The years following Max's departure unfolded with the relentless momentum that carries children from childhood into adolescence and beyond. For Emily, now entering her teen years, life developed a rhythm that would have seemed impossible during those first devastating months without Max. The acute pain of separation gradually transformed into a more manageable ache, still present but no longer debilitating. On her 12th birthday, Robert presented Emily with a leather-bound journal embossed with paw prints. A more sophisticated version of the notebook she had filled with observations about Max. "For your continued research," he explained as she ran her fingers over the cover. Emily embraced the gift wholeheartedly, establishing a new routine of writing daily entries about animal behavior, rehabilitation techniques, and her evolving understanding of conservation ethics. Her academic focus sharpened with remarkable intensity. Where once she had struggled to engage with subjects that didn't interest her, Emily now approached all her studies with determination, recognizing each class as a building block toward her future. Her science teachers marveled at her methodical approach to experiments and her insightful questions about ecological systems. When it came time to choose electives in high school, she selected advanced biology, environmental science, and an independent study project focused on canine behavior in wild versus domestic settings. "She's channeling her connection with Max into something constructive," her guidance counselor remarked during a parent-teacher conference. "It's quite extraordinary how she's transformed that loss into motivation." The foundation, too, had evolved. The controversy that had separated Emily and Max eventually faded from public memory, while replaced by recognition of the Thompson Animal Rescue Foundation's pioneering work in ethical rehabilitation. Their programs expanded, aided by grants that funded new facilities designed with both animal welfare and human safety in mind. Emily became increasingly involved, spending weekends and summers assisting with rehabilitation cases, though she maintained a careful emotional distance from the animals in their care. "I help them," she explained to Dr. Williams during one of their periodic check-ins, "but I don't try to become their person. They need to be ready to move on without getting attached to me." This mature perspective impressed the adults around her, though Robert sometimes worried that Emily had overcorrected, building walls around her heart that might keep out human connections as effectively as animal ones. Her social circle remained small and carefully curated, primarily consisting of fellow volunteers who shared her passion for wildlife conservation. Through it all, Max remained a constant presence in her thoughts. The foundation received quarterly updates from the preserve's monitoring team, clinical reports describing the German Shepherd pack's adaptation to their semi-wild environment. Emily devoured these documents, analyzing every detail for insights into Max's well-being. The reports confirmed what she had hoped. The pack had thrived in the preserve's protected wilderness, establishing a stable territory and successfully hunting small game. Max, according to the observers, had emerged as the pack's leader, his intelligence and adaptability serving him well in their new environment. On quiet nights, Emily would often stand at her bedroom window, gazing toward the distant mountains where Max roamed free. Sometimes, when the moon was full and the air particularly still, she imagined she could hear an echo of his howl carried on the wind, a fanciful notion that she never shared with anyone, not even her father. Her 16th birthday brought an unexpected gift. The preserve's director had approved a special request for Emily to view footage from the motion-activated cameras positioned throughout the territory where Max's pack was known to travel. For hours she sat transfixed before the computer screen, watching grainy nighttime images of 4 German shepherds moving with fluid grace through the underbrush. Max was easily identifiable by the distinctive white patch on his chest, a marking that had grown more pronounced with age. In one clip, he stood alert on a rocky outcropping, surveying his domain with a regal bearing that brought tears to Emily's eyes. "He looks so strong," she whispered, pausing the footage to study his mature form. "So much larger than I remember." "He's approximately 100 pounds now," the preserve's biologist confirmed. "The alpha position suits him. He's led the pack successfully for nearly 5 years." The footage reignited Emily's determination to work in wildlife conservation. She applied herself to her studies with renewed vigor, researching colleges with strong programs in wildlife biology and rehabilitation science. By her senior year, her academic achievements had attracted attention from several prestigious universities, including one located near the Blue Ridge Wildlife Preserve. "It's just a coincidence," she insisted when Michael teased her about the location being so close to Max's territory. But the wistful expression that crossed her face suggested otherwise. When acceptance letters arrived in the spring of her senior year, Emily's decision was immediate and unwavering. She would attend Eastern Wildlife Conservation University, just 50 miles from the preserve where Max lived. Though the preserve's visitation restrictions remained in place, The proximity offered a comfort she couldn't fully articulate, as if being within the same mountain range somehow maintained the invisible thread that had always connected them. The first signs of Robert's illness appeared during Emily's sophomore year of college. Small things at first: increased fatigue after his daily rounds at the foundation, occasional shortness of breath when climbing the stairs to his office, or persistent cough he attributed to seasonal allergies. He dismissed these symptoms with the practiced nonchalance of a man accustomed to putting others' needs before his own, focusing instead on the foundation's expanding programs and Emily's flourishing academic career. It was Michael, home for a weekend visit from his law practice in Richmond, who first noticed the concerning changes in their father's appearance. The robust, energetic man who had single-handedly built their rehabilitation center had grown noticeably thinner, his face gray with exhaustion by early afternoon. "You need to see a doctor," Michael insisted after watching Robert struggle to catch his breath following a brief walk to the barn. "This isn't normal, Dad." Robert reluctantly agreed to a checkup, expecting reassurance about overwork and advancing age. Instead, the appointment led to a series of increasingly specialized consultations, culminating in a diagnosis that fell upon the family like a physical blow: idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, a progressive, irreversible scarring of the lung tissue that gradually reduces the body's ability to absorb oxygen. "At this stage, we can manage the symptoms and slow the progression," Dr. Harmon explained during a family consultation, her kind eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. "But you need to understand that this condition is chronic and eventually terminal." The prognosis hit Emily with particular force. Her mother's death had occurred when she was too young to fully comprehend the process of losing a parent. Now, at 20 years old, she understood all too clearly what the doctor's careful phrasing signified. Her father, her rock, her advocate, the man who had understood her connection with Max when no one else did, was facing a battle he could not ultimately win. Robert approached his diagnosis with characteristic practicality, immediately implementing plans to ensure the foundation's continued operation regardless of his health status. He promoted their longtime operations manager to assistant director, created detailed procedural manuals for every aspect of the rehabilitation center's work, and updated his will to establish a trust that would fund the foundation's core programs in perpetuity. "Nothing changes," he insisted during a family dinner, pushing his barely touched food around his plate. "We adjust and move forward just like we always have." But despite his determination, changes accumulated with inexorable persistence. The 5-mile hikes he had enjoyed throughout the mountain trails became too taxing for his compromised lungs. His daily involvement at the foundation gradually reduced from full days to mornings only, then to several hours a few times per week. The supplemental oxygen he initially used only at night became a constant companion, the portable tank a visible reminder of his body's limitations. Emily adjusted her academic schedule to spend more time at home, taking online courses when possible and making the hour-long drive from campus 3 times weekly. She inherited many of Robert's responsibilities at the foundation, applying her education and innate understanding of animal behavior to maintain the high standards of care he had established. During one of their weekly review meetings, Robert broached a subject that had clearly been weighing on his mind. "I've been thinking about the preservation program," he began, his voice raspy from the persistent cough that plagued him. "About Max and the others." Emily looked up from the budget spreadsheet they had been discussing, her attention immediately captured by the mention of Max's name. "What about them? The quarterly reports say they're doing well." Robert nodded, adjusting the nasal cannula that delivered his supplemental oxygen. "They are. But I realized something recently. It's been almost 10 years since we sent them to the preserve." 10 years, Emmy. The significance wasn't lost on Emily. Most German shepherds lived between 10 and 13 years. Max, now approaching 11, had already entered his senior years. "I'd like to see him again," Robert continued, his gaze steady despite the emotion underlying his words. "Before I can't make the trip anymore. Before he's gone too." Emily felt her chest tighten with conflicting emotions. The preserve's strict protocols had always forbidden former caretakers from visiting released animals, a policy designed to prevent disruption to their wild adaptation. In 10 years, she had respected this boundary, content with the reports and occasional footage that confirmed Max's successful transition to his natural environment. "The preserve won't allow it," she said softly. "You know their rules." "Rules can have exceptions," Robert replied, a hint of his old determination flashing in his eyes. "Passionate exceptions for special circumstances." The conversation planted a seed that took root in Emily's thoughts, growing stronger as her father's condition gradually worsened. By the following spring, when Robert was hospitalized for a severe respiratory infection, the idea had blossomed into something resembling a plan. After his discharge, during a rare moment when they were alone on the porch of the family home, Emily broached the subject again. "If we could arrange a visit to see Max, would you be strong enough to make the journey?" Robert's answering smile contained a shadow of his former vigor. "For that? Absolutely." The logistics of arranging a reunion with Max presented formidable challenges. The Blue Ridge Wildlife Preserve operated under strict regulations designed to minimize human interference with rehabilitated animals. Visitors were limited to designated observation areas far from the territories established by released predators. The specific location of Max's pack was intentionally omitted from public records to prevent unauthorized attempts to view or interact with them. Emily began methodically addressing these obstacles, applying the same careful research skills that had distinguished her academic career. Her position as an advanced student in wildlife biology provided legitimate access to the preserve's research database, where GPS tracking data recorded the seasonal movements of monitored packs, including Max's. While directly accessing this information for personal reasons violated the preserve's ethical guidelines, Emily justified the breach as necessary for what she increasingly viewed as a humanitarian mission, fulfilling her father's wish before his declining health made such a journey impossible. "The Northwest Quadrant," she told Robert during one of their planning sessions, carefully spreading a topographical map across the kitchen table. "That's where they've established their primary territory. According to the seasonal data, they follow a predictable pattern, moving to the lower elevations as fall approaches." Robert studied the map with the focused attention he had once given to rehabilitation treatment plans. "So late September would be our best window?" "When they're transitioning territories." Emily nodded, pointing to a winding blue line on the map. "This river creates a natural boundary they patrol regularly. There's an access road that runs parallel to it for about 3 miles, officially for maintenance vehicles only, but accessible with the right permissions." Obtaining those permissions became Emily's next challenge. For weeks, she cultivated relationships with the preserve's research staff, volunteering to assist with data collection and habitat assessment projects. Her genuine expertise and enthusiasm made her a welcome addition to their field teams, eventually earning her limited access credentials for specific research zones, including, crucially, those adjacent to the northwestern maintenance roads. Michael, now a partner in his Richmond law firm, reacted with alarm when Emily finally revealed their developing plan during a family dinner. "This is completely irresponsible," he argued, his voice tight with concern. "You're risking your academic standing, possibly your entire career, not to mention Dad's health. And for what? To see a dog that probably won't even remember either of you." "He's not just a dog," Emily countered, her normally calm demeanor giving way to rare anger. "He was family, and he will remember." The siblings' argument escalated until Robert's rasping cough interrupted them, a harsh reminder of the urgency underlying their disagreement. When he caught his breath, Robert addressed his son with quiet dignity. "I understand your concerns, Michael. They're valid, and I appreciate your looking out for us. But this is important to me." He reached for Emily's hand across the table. "Important to both of us. My condition isn't improving, and we all know what that means. This might be my last chance to see what became of our work, to see if what we sacrificed for was worth it." Michael's professional composure cracked, revealing the frightened son beneath. You could collapse out there, miles from medical help. The elevation alone puts strain on compromised lungs. "I'll have my oxygen," Robert replied calmly. "And Emily will ensure we don't venture beyond my capabilities." His gaze held his son steadily. "I'm still making my own decisions, Michael. This one matters to me." After a tense silence, Michael nodded reluctantly. "Then I'm coming with you. Someone needs to be the voice of reason when you two start thinking with your hearts instead of your heads." The planning accelerated with Michael's reluctant participation. His legal background proved unexpectedly valuable, identifying liability concerns they hadn't considered and helping craft contingency plans for various scenarios. Emily continued gathering intelligence from the preserve, compiling data on Max's pack movements and behaviors while maintaining the pretense of academic research. By late August, their preparation was nearing completion. Emily had secured a 3-day research permit for vegetation sampling in sectors adjacent to Max's territory, providing a legitimate reason for their presence in the restricted area. Michael had arranged for a specialized all-terrain vehicle equipped to transport Robert and his oxygen equipment safely across the preserve's challenging landscape. After considerable debate, they decided against informing Dr. Williams or any Foundation staff about their true intentions, agreeing that plausible deniability would protect the organization if their plan was discovered. As September approached, Robert's health took another downturn. A routine checkup revealed diminished oxygen saturation levels and increased scarring in his lungs. His pulmonologist recommended against any travel to higher elevations and suggested increasing his supplemental oxygen flow rate. "You should reconsider this trip," Michael urged after the appointment, his expression grave. The doctor was clear about the risks. Robert shook his head, a stubborn set to his jaw that both his children recognized from childhood disagreements. "The risk is worth it. I've calculated what matters to me in whatever time I have left, and this is on that very short list." The night before their scheduled departure, Emily sat alone on the porch swing, studying satellite images of the preserve on her tablet. The rational part of her brain acknowledged the multiple ways their plan could fail. Max's pack might be hunting in a different sector than predicted. They might encounter preserve rangers who questioned their presence in restricted areas. Robert's health might deteriorate suddenly in the challenging environment. Yet beneath these practical concerns lay a deeper anxiety she could barely admit to herself. What if Michael was right? What if Max didn't remember them? What if the wild, magnificent creature she had glimpsed in tracking footage retained no connection to the puppy she had raised and loved? Could she bear to watch her father's disappointment if the reunion he'd dreamed of ended with a wild animal's indifference or worse, hostility? As darkness settled over the mountains, Emily closed the tablet and looked up at the star-filled sky. Somewhere under that same canopy of stars, Max was leading his pack through the wilderness that had become his home. Tomorrow, after 10 years of separation maintained by rules and distance, their paths would converge again for closure or heartbreak she couldn't predict. But as she finally rose to make final preparations for their journey, Emily felt a certainty that transcended rational analysis. Some bonds once formed remained unbroken by time or distance or even the transformation from domestic to wild. Whether that proved true for her and Max would be revealed in less than 24 hours. Dawn broke with crystalline clarity over the Blue Ridge Mountains, the kind of perfect September morning that painters struggled to capture. Robert Thompson sat in the passenger seat of Michael's SUV, oxygen tank secured beside him, gazing at the landscape with quiet anticipation. Emily occupied the back seat, surrounded by maps, equipment, and the small duffel containing essentials for their 3-day expedition. The vehicle hummed along nearly empty highways as they headed west toward the preserve, each occupant lost in private thoughts. "We should reach the eastern entrance by 10, Michael announced, breaking the contemplative silence. His voice carried the carefully neutral tone he had adopted since agreeing to participate in their venture, neither approving nor condemning, but committed to ensuring his family's safety regardless of his personal reservations. Robert nodded, adjusting the nasal cannula that delivered his supplemental oxygen. Perfect timing. The morning ranger shift changes at 10:30, which should minimize questions about our equipment." Emily leaned forward between the front seats, her expression a mixture of determination and concern. "Remember, if anyone asks, we're conducting vegetation sampling for my graduate research project. The permits are legitimate, even if our primary purpose isn't." "Falsifying research data," Michael began, but Emily quickly interrupted. "We'll complete the actual sampling work. The data will be valid and valuable to the preserve. We're just expanding the project scope." Their conversation lapsed into silence again as the highway gave way to county roads, then to the gravel access route that served the preserve's eastern facilities. The visitor center emerged ahead, its rustic architecture designed to blend with the surrounding forest. Emily felt a surge of nervous energy as Michael parked in the small lot designated for research personnel. A weathered park ranger approached as they began unloading their equipment. "Thompson party?" he inquired, consulting a clipboard. "We've got you scheduled for Sector 17 vegetation sampling." "Pretty remote area. You sure you've got the right transportation for that terrain?" Michael gestured toward the specialized all-terrain vehicle secured to the trailer behind his SUV. "We've upgraded from the standard options. My father will be accompanying us as an observer, and we wanted to ensure his comfort." The ranger's gaze shifted to Robert, noting the oxygen equipment with professional neutrality. "I should advise you that Sector 17 reaches elevations approaching 3,800 feet. Have you consulted medical professionals about that altitude with your condition, sir?" "My doctor is fully informed," Robert replied smoothly, the technical truth of the statement masking its substantial omissions. "We've adjusted my oxygen flow rate accordingly." After examining their permits and equipment, the ranger provided the access codes for the maintenance gates along their route. "Stay on the designated roads and sampling sites. We've had reports of increased predator activity in the northwestern quadrant, including the German Shepherd pack that was released from your foundation years back." Emily's heart skipped at the casual mention of Max's pack, but she maintained a composed expression. "We'll be careful. Has their territory shifted recently?" "Shifted? No. They're pretty established now. Alpha male's getting older, must be 10 or 11 now, but still running the show from what our wildlife cams show." The ranger chuckled. "Funny thing about that pack, most rehabilitated predators avoid human structures entirely, but these shepherds patrol along the maintenance road regularly. Almost like they're keeping an eye on us instead of the other way around." With final safety instructions and radio check procedures confirmed, they began the journey into the preserve's interior. The specialized vehicle performed admirably over the increasingly rugged terrain, its modified suspension system minimizing jolts that might strain Robert's compromised lungs. Emily navigated from the back seat, directing Michael along maintenance roads that gradually ascended into the mountain landscape Max now called home. By early afternoon, they had reached the northwestern quadrant. Michael parked at a small clearing designated as a research station, complete with a basic shelter for equipment storage and emergency use. From this base, they could access several sampling sites within reasonable proximity to the areas where Emily's intelligence suggested Max's pack might be encountered. "We should establish camp here," Michael decided, helping Robert from the vehicle. "Dad, you're looking pale. Let's get you resting in the shade before we do anything else." Robert didn't protest, a concerning indication of his fatigue after the journey. Emily quickly set up a portable chair with overhead canopy, adjusting her father's oxygen equipment while Michael unloaded their essential supplies. But the effort of the trip had clearly taxed Robert's limited reserves, and Emily exchanged a worried glance with her brother over their father's bowed head. "Perhaps we should just focus on the research work today," she suggested gently. "Get acclimated to the elevation and start fresh tomorrow with our additional objectives." Robert raised his head, determination evident despite his exhaustion. "We've come this far. I don't want to waste a day." After an hour's rest and a light meal, Robert's color improved somewhat. Following a family conference, they decided to conduct legitimate vegetation sampling at the nearest designated site, which conveniently bordered the river that marked the edge of Max's territory. The sampling work would provide cover for their presence while allowing them to observe the area where the pack might appear during their evening patrol. As the afternoon sun began its descent behind the mountain ridges, they established position at the sampling site. Emily methodically collected the required specimens, carefully labeling and documenting each according to preserve protocols. Michael maintained vigilant watch, binoculars scanning the surrounding forest and meadows for any movement. Robert sat nearby, his weathered hand steady as he assisted with sample preparation, his gaze frequently drifting to the tree line across the river. Hours passed without incident. The setting sun painted the landscape in amber hues, transforming the flowing river into a ribbon of molten gold. Birdsong gradually yielded to the emerging chorus of evening insects, signaling the transition from day to night. Emily completed her sampling work with methodical precision, though her attention remained divided, every unexpected sound causing her heart to race with anticipation. "We should head back to the base station before dark," Michael finally announced, checking his watch. "The temperature drops quickly up here and the terrain gets treacherous without proper light." Robert's shoulders slumped with poorly concealed disappointment. "Just a little longer," he urged. "The ranger mentioned they patrol in the evenings." Emily was about to support her brother's recommendation when she froze, her attention captured by a sound that raised the hair on her arms a low, a distinctive bark echoing across the river, followed by the rustling of underbrush along the opposite bank. "Get back to the vehicle now," Michael ordered, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper as he moved protectively toward their father. "Emily, pack up. We're leaving." Emily remained motionless, her gaze fixed on the tree line where the sound had originated. "It's them," she breathed, recognition flaring in her chest with absolute certainty. "Max's pack." Michael grabbed her arm, his grip firm but not unkind. "This is exactly what I was worried about. We're exposed, Dad's vulnerable, and we're about to have multiple large predators approaching our position. The responsible thing is to retreat immediately." Robert struggled to rise from his chair, his movements hampered by the portable oxygen equipment. "Michael, this is why we came. We can't leave now." "We can and we will," Michael insisted, his lawyer's commanding presence emerging in crisis. "This isn't a controlled environment like the Foundation. These are wild animals now, regardless of their history. If they perceive us as threats or competitors, their instincts will override any past associations." The disagreement might have continued, but another sound silenced them all, a low growl from the vegetation just 20 yards downstream from their position. A large German shepherd emerged into view, its posture alert and assessing. Emily immediately recognized Stella, one of the females released alongside Max, though the dog bore little resemblance to the rehabilitation center resident she remembered. This was a wilderness predator, muscle rippled and confident, regarding them with wary calculation. Michael positioned himself between the German shepherd and his family, speaking in a low, steady voice. "Back away slowly. Don't run, don't make sudden movements." He reached carefully into his pocket, withdrawing the bear spray he had insisted on bringing despite Emily's objections. "If she advances, I'll deploy this. It won't cause permanent damage, but will give us time to reach safety." "Don't," Emily pleaded, her voice catching. "Please, Michael. She's not threatening us, she's assessing us. If you spray her, the others will respond defensively." Robert's hand found Emily's, squeezing with surprising strength. "Trust her, Michael. Emily understands them better than we do." The standoff continued, tension vibrating in the cooling evening air. Stella remained at the edge of the clearing, neither advancing nor retreating, her attention fixed on the humans with unblinking focus. Minutes stretched painfully until a second dog emerged from the underbrush, a younger male Emily didn't recognize, likely offspring born in the wilderness. "That's it," Michael decided, his patience exhausted. "Dad, I'm getting you to the vehicle." Emily grabbed the essential equipment and follow immediately. "We're outnumbered and it's getting dark." As Michael helped Robert to his feet, Emily made a sudden decision born of both desperation and long-dormant intuition. Ignoring her brother's hissed warning, she lowered herself to a crouching position and produced a soft, distinctive whistle, the same signal she had used during training sessions with Max a decade earlier. "Have you lost your mind?" Michael demanded, frozen in the act of supporting their father. "You're calling them closer?" "I'm calling him," Emily corrected, repeating the whistle with unwavering confidence. "If he's nearby, he'll remember this signal." The silence that followed seemed to stretch endlessly. Even Stella and the younger dog remained motionless, ears pricked forward at the familiar sound. Then from further upstream came a response, a distinctive bark that Emily would have recognized anywhere, despite the passage of years and the deepening of tone. "It's Max," Robert whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. "My God, Emily, he answered you." Michael's expression reflected the war between his protective instincts and the undeniable reality before him. "This doesn't change the risks. We're still exposed, with limited visibility and decreasing light. Whatever happens in the next few minutes, we need to maintain awareness that these are wild animals now, not the pets you remember." "They were never pets," Emily corrected gently, rising to her feet. "They were family we had to let go." Before Michael could respond, movement at the tree line captured their attention. A large, powerfully built German shepherd emerged from the shadows, his bearing regal and commanding. Age had whitened the fur around his muzzle and lightened the patch on his chest, but there was no mistaking the intelligent amber eyes that had once looked to Emily for guidance and affection. Max had arrived. The world seemed to hold its breath as Max stood at the edge of the clearing, silhouetted against the deepening twilight. He remained perfectly still, head high, assessing the unexpected human presence in his territory. The distance between them, perhaps 30 yards, felt simultaneously vast and insignificant after 10 years of separation. "Stay absolutely still," Michael cautioned, though the warning was unnecessary. Emily and Robert were transfixed, barely breathing as they watched the powerful animal who had once been an integral part of their family. Max's focus shifted between the three humans, his posture revealing neither aggression nor immediate recognition. After a long moment of assessment, he advanced several deliberate steps, closing half the distance between them. Stella and the younger dog moved to flank him, creating a coordinated formation that demonstrated their pack structure and Max's leadership. "He's trying to determine if we're a threat," Emily explained softly, careful not to make sudden movements. "This is normal territorial behavior." Michael maintained his protective stance, bear spray still gripped loosely in his hand, though he had lowered it to his side. "How long will this assessment last?" "We're losing daylight rapidly." "That depends on whether he remembers us," Emily answered, never taking her eyes from Max. Robert, who had been leaning heavily on Michael's support, suddenly straightened. With careful deliberation, he removed his hat and took one step forward, ignoring his son's instinctive attempt to restrain him. "Max," he called, his voice roughened by disease but carrying the same warm tone he had always used with the animals in their care. "Max, old friend, it's been a long time." The German shepherd's ears pricked forward at the sound of his name, his attention now fully focused on Robert. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then, with a visible shift in demeanor, Max lowered his head slightly and took another step forward, followed by another, moving with cautious interest rather than aggression. Emily felt tears gathering as she watched Max's behavior transform. The calculating predator assessment was giving way to something else: curiosity, perhaps even recognition. Instinctively, she mirrored her father's action, taking a single step forward and kneeling to reduce her height, but assuming the same position she had used during their training sessions years ago. "Emily, don't," Michael warned, tension evident in every line of his body. But Emily's focus had narrowed to the connection reforming across time and circumstance. "Max," she called softly, "it's me. Remember?" The German shepherd's pace quickened suddenly. He covered the remaining distance with fluid grace, moving directly toward Emily's kneeling form. Michael lunged forward protectively, but Robert caught his arm with surprising strength. "Wait," Robert urged. "Look at his body language. He's not threatening." Max stopped just feet from Emily, his amber eyes locked with hers in an intense gaze that seemed to transcend the decade of separation and the fundamental change in his nature. For a suspended moment, wilderness predator and human woman regarded each other across the chasm of time and circumstance. Then the massive German shepherd closed the final distance, and before anyone could react, he had grasped Emily's arm in his powerful jaws. Michael shouted in alarm, breaking free from Robert's restraining grip, but froze at the scene before him. Max wasn't attacking. His hold on Emily's arm was gentle, a communicative gesture rather than aggressive contact. After a moment, he released her and pressed his graying muzzle against her chest in a gesture so reminiscent of their past interactions that Emily could no longer contain her emotions. "You remember," she whispered, tears flowing freely as she carefully, reverently placed her hands on either side of the dog's powerful head. "After all this time, you remember us." Max pulled back from the contact, regarding her with intelligent eyes that seemed to hold recognition impossible to dismiss as mere anthropomorphism. He turned toward Robert, approaching with the same deliberate movement, stopping just before the older man who now leaned heavily on his oxygen equipment. "Hello, old friend," Robert said softly, extending a trembling hand. The German shepherd sniffed the offered hand thoroughly, seemingly cataloging the changes time and illness had wrought. Then, with gentle precision, he pressed his head beneath Robert's palm in a gesture unmistakably seeking contact. Robert's weathered face transformed with joy as he carefully stroked the fur that had once been under his daily care. "I can't believe it," Michael murmured, bear spray forgotten in his slackened grip. "He actually remembers you both." As twilight deepened into dusk, the extraordinary reunion continued to unfold. Stella and the younger dog maintained a watchful distance, clearly following Max's lead in accepting the human visitors. Max moved between Emily and Robert, alternating his attention, occasionally returning to the pack as if providing reassurance of their safety. "We should set up proper lighting," Emily eventually suggested, reluctant to break the magical moment, but aware of practical concerns. "The temperature's dropping and Dad needs to be comfortable." With Max's continued acceptance, they carefully established a small camp at the edge of the clearing. Robert's portable chair was positioned prominently, his oxygen equipment adjusted for the night air's demands. Solar-powered lanterns provided gentle illumination that wouldn't disturb the natural rhythms of the wilderness around them. Throughout these preparations, Max remained nearby, observing with evident interest. When Robert was securely settled, the German shepherd approached again, deliberately lying down at his feet in a position that mirrored his customary place in Robert's office a decade earlier. The symbolic significance of the gesture brought fresh tears to Emily's eyes. 10 years in the wild," she whispered to Michael as they completed the camp setup. "Yet he remembers not just who we are, but his relationship to us. How is that possible?" Michael shook his head, his earlier skepticism visibly shaken. "I don't know. By every logical assessment, he should be completely wild now, viewing humans as potential threats or irrelevant intruders. This is extraordinary." As night fully enveloped the mountains, the family found themselves in a scenario none of them had truly believed possible, sharing space with a wild predator who somehow retained the connection formed in his earliest development. Max remained with them, occasionally rising to check on his pack members who maintained their distance but stayed within sight, a compromise between their wild nature and their alpha's evident choice to reconnect with the humans from his past. In the gentle pool of lamplight, surrounded by the pristine wilderness that had become Max's kingdom, Robert's face reflected a contentment that had been absent for years. "Worth every risk," he murmured, his hand resting lightly on Max's powerful shoulder. "Absolutely worth it." The first light of dawn filtered through the forest canopy, casting dappled shadows across the small clearing where Emily, Robert, and Michael had spent the night. Max had remained with them until the early hours, eventually departing with a purposeful glance at the surrounding wilderness, a leader attending to his responsibilities. The family had slept fitfully, each processing the emotional magnitude of the reunion in their own way. Emily awakened first, stretching cramped muscles and immediately scanning the perimeter for signs of Max's return. The clearing remained empty except for their small camp, though distant birdsong suggested the mountain wilderness was fully awake around them. She busied herself preparing coffee on their portable stove, careful not to disturb her father, who slept more peacefully than she had seen in months. "He's still resting," Michael observed quietly, emerging from his tent with his customary attention to detail despite their rustic surroundings. "First night in weeks I haven't heard him coughing continuously." Emily nodded, grateful for this small blessing. "Something about being here, about seeing Max, it's good for him." "I'm still processing what happened yesterday," Michael admitted, accepting the steaming cup she offered. "By every logical standard, Max should be completely wild now. The bond he's maintained defies conventional understanding." Their quiet conversation halted as a rustling emerged from the underbrush. Max appeared at the clearing's edge, his powerful form moving with the fluid grace that had impressed them the previous evening. This morning, however, Emily immediately noted something different in his gait, a subtle asymmetry, a careful favoring of his right hind leg. "He's injured," she whispered, setting down her cup and moving instinctively toward him. As Max approached, the injury became unmistakable. A long laceration ran across his right flank, partially scabbed but still seeping in places. The wound wasn't fresh, perhaps several days old, but its severity was evident even to untrained eyes. "That's not a minor cut," Michael observed, professional detachment giving way to genuine concern. "It looks deep." Emily knelt beside Max, who permitted her careful examination with stoic patience. Her trained gaze assessed the wound with growing alarm. "This isn't from natural causes, not a branch or fall. The cut is too clean, too deliberate." Her fingers gently probed the surrounding area, causing Max to flinch slightly despite his evident effort to remain still. "There's infection setting in." Robert awakened during their examination, immediately alert despite his frailty. He joined them with careful movements, oxygen tank trailing behind him. "Poachers," he concluded grimly after studying the wound. "The preserve has struggled with them for years. They set snares for smaller game, but predators like Max's pack would defend their territory against human intrusion." The implications settled heavily among them. Max had likely confronted trespassers in his domain, protecting his pack at significant personal cost. The wound, while not immediately life-threatening, presented serious concerns given their remote location and Max's wild status. "He needs antibiotics and proper cleaning," Emily stated, professional training overriding emotional response. "This kind of infection can spread quickly, especially in older animals." "We brought a basic first aid kit," Michael reminded her, "but nothing suitable for treating a wound of this magnitude, particularly in a wild animal." Robert's weathered face reflected painful understanding. "He came to us for help," he said softly. "After all these years surviving on his own, he recognized we might be able to assist when he's vulnerable." The truth of Robert's observation was difficult to deny. Max's behavior seeking him out despite his injury, allowing examination without resistance, suggested a level of trust and intelligence that transcended typical wild animal behavior. He had remembered not just their identities, but their function in his early life as healers and protectors. "What can we reasonably do here?" Michael asked, pragmatism asserting itself. "We're 3 hours from the nearest veterinary facility, and transporting a wild predator is illegal without proper authorization." Emily's mind raced through potential solutions, each presenting significant ethical and practical challenges. The preserve headquarters has a wildlife veterinarian on staff, but involving them would mean explaining our presence here, our prior connection to Max everything, which could result in serious consequences for your career and the Foundation, Michael concluded. Robert watched Max settle carefully onto the ground, the proud animal's discomfort evident despite his stoic demeanor. "We need to make a decision based on what's best for Max, not just what's convenient or safe for us." The ethical implications of their situation crystallized into an impossible choice. Max's injury, while serious, wasn't immediately life-threatening. Wild animals sustained similar wounds regularly, and many recovered through natural healing processes. Intervention would disrupt the natural order. The preserve was designed to maintain. Predators lived, suffered, and sometimes died according to wilderness laws far older than human ethics. Yet Max wasn't simply a wild animal. His history has demonstrated connection to them, and his apparent trust complicated the calculus immeasurably. The Foundation had raised him, teaching him to hunt and survive, but also creating the profound bond that had transcended a decade of separation. Did that history create an obligation that superseded wilderness protocols? There are 3 paths before us, Emily said, organizing their options with characteristic methodical clarity despite the emotional weight behind each. First, we do nothing, respect his wild status, and allow natural processes to take their course. Second, we provide basic first aid with the supplies we have, which might help but won't fully address the infection. Third, we report the injury to preserve authorities and accept whatever consequences follow. Michael paced the small clearing, attorney's mind dissecting each option. The first choice respects the preserve's fundamental philosophy but potentially condemns Max to suffering we could prevent. The second offers temporary relief but no real solution. The third jeopardizes Emily's career and potentially the Foundation's relationship with conservation authorities. Robert remained seated beside Max, one hand resting gently on the German Shepherd's shoulder. "There's a fourth option we haven't discussed," he said quietly. "We could take him with us, bring him back to the Foundation for proper treatment." The suggestion landed like a thunderclap. Removing Max from the preserve violated multiple regulations and ethical principles, potentially undermining years of successful rehabilitation work. More profoundly, it would separate him from the pack he led and the wilderness existence he had mastered. "Dad, that's not just bending rules, that's breaking fundamental conservation principles," Emily protested, though the temptation behind his suggestion pulled at her heart. Max isn't just an individual animal anymore. He's an alpha with responsibilities to his pack. Removing him could destabilize the entire social structure they've built. Not to mention the legal implications, Michael added. Removing a wild animal from a federal preserve constitutes poaching, regardless of our history with him. Robert's expression reflected stubborn determination despite his physical frailty. Sometimes compassion requires breaking rules. This animal came to us for help the same way he did as a puppy in that drainage ditch. Are we really going to turn our backs on that trust because of regulations? The ethical debate intensified as morning stretched toward midday. Max remained with them, periodically rising to check his surroundings before returning to Robert's side, his behavior suggesting both his continued duties as pack leader and his trust in the humans deliberating his fate. What would be best for Max? Emily finally asked, returning to the Foundation's core principle. Not what's best for us or easiest, or most legally defensible, but what serves his welfare and dignity as the being he has become. The question hung in the mountain air, unanswerable through conventional ethical frameworks. Max was neither fully wild nor domestic. He existed in a unique category created by their shared history and his subsequent decade of wilderness adaptation. The ethical dilemma remained unresolved when nature intervened with decisive force. Dark clouds had been gathering along the western ridgeline throughout their discussion, initially dismissed as typical mountain weather. By early afternoon, however, the rapidly advancing storm front could no longer be ignored. "That's not a passing shower," Michael observed, anxiety evident as he studied the threatening sky. The weather report mentioned potential thunderstorms, but nothing of this magnitude. The storm's approach accelerated with alarming speed, characteristic of the volatile weather patterns that occasionally ravaged the higher elevations. Within minutes, the temperature dropped precipitously and wind began whipping through the clearing with increasing ferocity. "We need to break camp immediately," Emily urged, already securing loose equipment. "The vehicle is parked 2 miles from here. If we leave now, we might reach it before the worst hits." Robert struggled to his feet, oxygen equipment hampering his movements as gusting wind buffeted his frail frame. What about Max? We can't just leave him injured with this storm coming. He survived 10 years of mountain weather, Michael countered, though his expression betrayed his own concern. His pack will shelter together. Wild animals have instincts for these situations. A tremendous thunderclap punctuated Michael's statement, followed immediately by a torrential downpour that reduced visibility to mere yards. Max, who had been observing their hasty preparations, suddenly became alert, ears forward and body tense with evident alarm. Something's wrong, Emily realized, recognizing the change in his demeanor. This isn't normal caution. Before they could process this observation, a deafening crack split the air as a massive pine at the clearing's edge, weakened by disease and saturated ground, it began a catastrophic collapse toward their camp. Michael shouted a warning, lunging toward his father as the ancient tree descended with terrifying inevitability. In the chaos that followed, nature's violence coincided with remarkable clarity of purpose. The falling tree crashed across their escape route, destroying their communications equipment and narrowly missing the humans. Immediate evacuation became impossible as the storm's intensity transformed the surrounding forest into a maelstrom of driving rain, limited visibility, and dangerous debris. The research station, Emily shouted above the storm's roar, pointing toward the small shelter they had passed during their arrival. It's our only option now. Supporting Robert between them, Emily and Michael fought their way through the deluge toward the rudimentary structure, their progress hampered by treacherous footing and the constant assault of wind-driven rain. Max moved alongside them, his injury temporarily forgotten as he navigated with confident determination, occasionally pausing as if ensuring they followed the correct path. The small research station offered minimal protection, little more than a reinforced shed with basic emergency supplies, but it represented their only refuge from the storm's unbridled fury. As they finally reached its shelter, the full impact of their situation became clear. The access road would likely be impassable due to flooding, medical assistance unreachable, and their predicament unknown to outside authorities. Trapped in the wilderness with limited supplies, a seriously ill man dependent on supplemental oxygen, and an injured wild animal that defied conventional categorization. The Thompson family faced a night where nature's indifference to human concerns would test the limits of both practical resources and emotional resilience. The research station's rudimentary shelter creaked and shuddered under the storm's relentless assault. Inside, the Thompson family huddled together, listening to the cacophony of wind, rain, and occasional crashes as branches succumbed to nature's fury. The structure's single room offered minimal comfort, a few metal shelves stocked with basic supplies, a small propane heater that thankfully still functioned, and a narrow bench that now served as Robert's makeshift bed. "Dad's oxygen is at 30%, Michael reported after checking the portable tank's gauge. The spare tank was in the equipment that got crushed by the tree. At his current flow rate, he has maybe 6 hours remaining." Emily nodded grimly, cataloging their situation with forced composure. "The radio's destroyed, cell service is non-existent up here, and the main road is likely impassable until the storm subsides. We're effectively cut off." Robert's breathing had grown increasingly labored over the past hour, the combination of exertion, altitude, and stress taxing his compromised lungs. Despite his obvious discomfort, he maintained a stoic demeanor, focusing instead on Max, who paced anxiously near the station's only door. "He wants to leave," Robert observed, his voice barely audible above the storm. "Something's pulling him outside." Max's behavior had indeed grown increasingly restless. The German shepherd alternated between pressing against the door and returning to Robert's side, whining softly with evident distress. His injured flank hadn't slowed his movements, suggesting adrenaline was temporarily overriding pain. "He's probably concerned about his pack," Emily suggested, though uncertainty tinged her voice. The storm would scatter them, especially if they were hunting when it hit. As if understanding her words, Max's whining intensified. He scratched at the door with new urgency, then turned to face Emily directly, his intelligent eyes holding hers with unmistakable communication. He wants us to follow him, she realized, the certainty of her interpretation surprising even herself. It's the same behavior he showed during search and rescue training years ago. Michael shook his head emphatically. That's anthropomorphizing, Emily. He's a wild animal responding to instinctual drives, not formulating a rescue plan. I'm not so sure, Robert interjected, struggling to sit upright. Remember that Max was halfway through advanced search and rescue training before we released him. Those patterns were deeply ingrained. The debate became academic when Max's agitation reached new heights. With a decisive bark that startled them all, he rammed his substantial weight against the door's weak latch, forcing it open against the howling wind. Rather than bolting into the storm as expected, he remained in the doorway, looking back at them with unmistakable expectation. He's waiting for us, Emily stated, conviction replacing uncertainty. Dad, I think he knows something we don't. Robert nodded weakly. I believe you're right. The question is whether we trust him enough to follow. The decision crystallized with brutal simplicity: remain in deteriorating shelter with dwindling oxygen, or follow a wild animal into treacherous conditions on faith in a decade-old connection. When framed against Robert's increasingly labored breathing, the choice became clear. We follow Max, Emily decided, already gathering essential supplies into a waterproof pack. Michael helped me get Dad ready to move. Despite profound reservations, Michael assisted in preparing their father, securing the oxygen canister and wrapping Robert in the emergency thermal blanket from the station's limited supplies. Together they faced the raging storm, placing their lives in the trust of an animal that existed between two worlds. The moment they stepped outside, Max's demeanor transformed. Gone was the anxious pacing, replaced by focused determination as he moved ahead of them at a deliberate pace that accommodated Robert's limitations. He led them not along the expected trail toward the parking area, but down a narrow deer path that wound through dense undergrowth, it partially sheltered from the worst of the wind and driving rain. He's taken us somewhere specific, Emily observed as they struggled to keep pace, supporting Robert between them. This isn't random movement. For nearly an hour they followed Max through the tempestuous wilderness, their progress agonizingly slow but steadier than seemed possible under the circumstances. The path gradually descended, reducing the strain on Robert's lungs as they moved to lower elevation. Max frequently doubled back to check their progress, always returning to the same determined course, navigating with unerring confidence through terrain rendered nearly impassable by the storm. When they finally emerged into a small clearing, Max's destination became apparent. Nestled against a granite outcropping stood an abandoned fire observation cabin, its sturdy construction weathered but intact. Though clearly unused for years, its elevated foundation had protected it from the flash flooding that now coursed through lower areas, and its metal roof had withstood the battering wind where more fragile structures would have failed. He brought us to shelter, Michael acknowledged, amazement overriding his earlier skepticism, as they carefully maneuvered Robert up the cabin's 3 steps. How could he possibly know this was here? The cabin's interior, though dusty from disuse, offered genuine refuge: a small wood stove, rudimentary furniture, and most critically, the emergency supplies that included bottled oxygen intended for fire crews working at high elevations. Within minutes they had Robert connected to fresh oxygen, his breathing easing as the life-giving supplement flowed. His territory, Robert explained between deep, grateful breaths. He's patrolled every inch of this land for years. Of course he knows what resources exist within his domain. As the storm continued its assault outside, the profound implications of their rescue settled upon them. Max had not only recognized their peril but had formulated and executed a solution that required abstract reasoning, memory of human needs, and trust that they would follow his guidance. The boundary between wild predator and loyal companion had dissolved into something transcendent, a partnership that honored both his wilderness sovereignty and taught the enduring bonds of his early life. Dawn broke with lingering rain but diminished wind, revealing a transformed landscape of fallen trees, swollen streams, and scattered debris. Robert's condition had stabilized overnight thanks to the cabin's emergency oxygen supply, though the ordeal had clearly drained his limited reserves. As Emily tended to her father, Michael ventured outside to assess their situation and discovered Max waiting patiently on the cabin's small porch, his stoic presence suggesting he had maintained vigil throughout the night. "The access road is completely washed out about a quarter-mile down," Michael reported upon returning. "No vehicle could navigate it, even if we could reach our transport. We're effectively stranded until rescue teams can clear the damage." Emily joined him at the cabin's single window, surveying the storm's aftermath. "The preserve staff will eventually check this cabin once they can access the affected areas. We just need to hold out until then." As they discussed their options, Max rose from his resting position and approached the door with clear intent, repeating the behavior that had preceded their journey to the cabin. This time, however, his demeanor suggested less urgency and more deliberate invitation. "I think he wants to show us something else," Emily suggested, her trust in Max's communication now firmly established. With Robert temporarily stable and resting, Emily and Michael agreed to follow Max's lead, remaining within shouting distance of the cabin. The German Shepherd led them along a winding path that skirted storm damage with impressive efficiency, eventually bringing them to a small, sun-dappled clearing set into the mountainside. What they found there stopped them in their tracks. At the clearing center stood a carefully arranged pile of stones, too methodical to be natural, too deliberate to be accidental. Around this makeshift cairn, the ground had been kept meticulously clear of encroaching vegetation, creating a maintained space that stood in stark contrast to the surrounding wilderness. "It's a grave," Emily whispered, recognition dawning as Max approached the stone pile and sat beside it with solemn dignity. "But whose?" Michael knelt beside the cairn, examining it with careful attention. "There's something here," he said, gently removing a weathered leather collar wedge between the upper stones. The metal tag, though tarnished by years of exposure, remained legible: Rex Thompson Rehabilitation Foundation. The implications hit them simultaneously. Rex, the German Shepherd released alongside Max 10 years earlier, had died in this wilderness. Rather than leaving his packmate to the natural cycle of decay that characterized wilderness death, Max had created and maintained this memorial with a level of sentimentality previously thought unique to humans. "He's been keeping it clear for years," Emily realized, noting the freshly trimmed vegetation around the cairn's perimeter, returning regularly to maintain this space. Max watched their discovery with attentive eyes, his posture suggesting a sharing of something precious rather than territorial defense. When Emily knelt beside him, he pressed his graying muzzle against her hand in a gesture that transcended species barriers, communicating a shared understanding of loss and remembrance. "The rangers mentioned poaching activity has increased in recent years," Michael said quietly, examining the collar more closely. "No visible signs of injury on the tag, but—" "Max has been protecting his territory from human intrusion," Emily concluded, connecting the evidence with Max's own recent injury. Rex may have been the first casualty of that conflict. The discovery transformed their understanding of Max's existence in the wilderness. He hadn't simply survived by reverting to pure instinct. He had maintained complex emotional connections and cultural practices that blurred the conventional boundaries between wild and domestic. The grave stood as testament to a consciousness that honored bonds beyond immediate survival needs, a memorial created by an animal who remembered and mourned. Their return to the cabin brought another surprise. Robert, feeling somewhat stronger after rest and supplemental oxygen, had managed to make his way to the porch, where he now sat watching the tree line with intense focus. "We have visitors," he announced as Emily and Michael approached. Max brought family. At the clearing's edge stood Stella, the female German Shepherd they had glimpsed upon first arriving at the preserve. Beside her, partially hidden in underbrush, several younger dogs observed the cabin with cautious curiosity, clearly Max's offspring, bearing his distinctive markings and intelligent eyes. The storm must have driven them to higher ground, Emily speculated, keeping her voice low to avoid startling the wary animals. They're seeking Max. As if confirming her assessment, Max approached the waiting pack, engaging in brief greeting behaviors that reaffirmed social bonds. After this reunion, he turned back toward the cabin, accompanied by a single young dog, a female approximately 2 years old, with Max's amber eyes and the distinctive white chest marking that had characterized his appearance since puppyhood. To everyone's astonishment, Max led this younger dog directly to the porch steps, communicating through subtle body language that appeared to encourage her forward. The younger shepherd approached hesitantly, clearly torn between natural caution toward humans and trust in her pack leader's guidance. "He's introducing her to us," Emily whispered, barely daring to breathe lest she disrupt the extraordinary interaction unfolding before them. Max nudged the younger dog forward until she stood directly before Emily, then performed a behavior that defied conventional understanding of canine cognition. With deliberate precision, he placed himself between Emily and the younger dog, alternately touching each with his muzzle in a gesture that unmistakably communicated connection and relationship. "He's telling her who you are," Robert observed softly, his weathered face alight with wonder, "showing her that you're part of his extended family." The young shepherd's initial wariness gradually yielded to curiosity. She stretched her neck forward, sniffing Emily's extended hand with increasing confidence. When Emily remained perfectly still, allowing this investigation without pressure, the dog took another step closer. Max watched this interaction with evident satisfaction before returning to the tree line where Stella and the other offspring waited. After a brief exchange of vocalizations, the main pack retreated into the forest, leaving only Max and the young female behind. "I don't understand," Michael said, confusion evident in his voice. "Why would he leave one behind?" The answer became apparent as the day progressed. While Max maintained his independent movement between cabin and forest, the young female whom Emily had begun calling Hope for her striking resemblance to Max at a similar age gradually acclimated to human presence. By evening she had ventured onto the porch, accepting careful contact from all three Thompsons while maintaining a watchful eye on Max for reassurance. "He's entrusting her to us," Emily finally realized as they prepared for another night in the cabin. Or more accurately, he's creating a bridge between his worlds. The profound significance of Max's action represented the ultimate reversal of their expectations. They had come to the preserve seeking closure, a final glimpse of the animal they had rehabilitated. Instead, Max had offered renewal, a continuation of their connection through the next generation, a living embodiment of the bond that had survived a decade of separation. This gift transcended mere sentiment. In presenting his offspring to Emily, Max had demonstrated a level of trust and forward thinking that acknowledged both his wilderness sovereignty and his enduring connection to the humans who had shaped his early development. The young shepherd represented not just a memorial to their shared past, but a bridge to a future where the artificial boundaries between wild and domestic, the animal and human family, might be reconceived in more nuanced terms. The morning of their third day in the preserve dawned clear and bright, the storm's violence yielding to the pristine beauty that had initially drawn the Thompson family to this remote wilderness. A preserve ranger's truck rumbled up the partially cleared access road shortly after sunrise, bringing both relief and the inevitable conclusion to their extraordinary reunion with Max. "We've been searching the affected area since yesterday afternoon," the ranger explained, surveying the cabin and its occupants with professional assessment. "When we saw smoke from the cabin chimney, we figured someone had sought emergency shelter." As Michael explained their situation, carefully editing the personal connection to Max while emphasizing Robert's medical needs, Emily stood at the edge of the porch where both Max and Hope watched with alert attention. The younger dog had remained close throughout the night, curled beside Emily's makeshift bed with trusting acceptance that belied her wild upbringing. Max had maintained a more independent presence, patrolling the perimeter before settling at the cabin's entrance like a sentinel. "Medical transport is on standby at the preserve headquarters," the ranger informed them after radio consultation with her superiors. We should move out within the hour if your father can travel." The news brought practical relief mingled with the weight of imminent farewell. Emily knelt beside Max, who approached with the dignified bearing that had characterized his wilderness existence. For a suspended moment, woman and wolf like Shepard regarded each other with a depth of connection that transcended conventional understanding. "This is goodbye, old friend," she whispered, allowing her fingers to gently trace the contours of his graying muzzle. "For real this time." Max held her gaze with those intelligent amber eyes, communicating something beyond words' wisdom, perhaps, or understanding that some partings are necessary despite enduring bonds. He pressed his head briefly against her shoulder in a gesture reminiscent of their earliest interactions, when he had been a frightened puppy seeking comfort in her steady presence. Robert made his way carefully to the porch, supported by Michael, his oxygen tank trailing behind. Though physically diminished by illness and exertion, his spirit seemed renewed as he lowered himself to Max's level with painful deliberation. "You've lived exactly the life we hoped you would," he told the German shepherd, voice rough with emotion. "Wild and free, but still carrying something of us with you. That's all we ever wanted." Max approached Robert with particular gentleness, seeming to sense the older man's fragility. He sat directly before him, their eyes level, two beings who had shared a profound journey now acknowledging its closing chapter. When Robert placed a trembling hand on Max's head in a final blessing, the dog remained perfectly still, accepting the touch with solemn dignity. "Sir, we really should prepare to move," the ranger called from the vehicle, professional concern evident in her voice. "Weather Service reports another system moving in by evening." The practical necessity of departure compressed their farewell into these brief, poignant moments. As the Thompsons gathered their minimal belongings, Emily faced the question they had silently avoided: Hope's future. The young German shepherd had shown no inclination to rejoin the main pack, remaining close to Emily with evident attachment. "What about her?" Michael asked quietly, nodding toward Hope, who watched their preparations with alert interest. "She doesn't seem wild like the others." Before Emily could respond, Max provided the answer with characteristic clarity of purpose. He approached Hope, engaging in brief communication through subtle canine signals, then deliberately moved toward the ranger's truck, looking back expectantly. His message was unmistakable: the younger dog would accompany them. "I think he's given her to us," Emily said softly, wonder mingling with responsibility in equal measure, creating a connection between his wilderness family and ours. The ranger, observing this interaction with professional interest, offered an unexpected solution. "We have an integrated conservation program for wilderness-born offspring of rehabilitated predators," she explained. "If this young female shows aptitude for human interaction, she could become part of our Conservation Ambassador initiative." This middle path, neither fully wild nor fully domesticated, seemed the perfect resolution. Hope would maintain connection to both worlds, much as Max had in his unique way, serving as living testament to the success of the Thompson Foundation's rehabilitation philosophy. As they prepared for departure, Max maintained his position at the clearing's edge, watching with alert attention. When Emily cast one final glance backward, he stood silhouetted against the wilderness that had become his kingdom, powerful, independent, yet still connected by invisible threads of memory and relationship. He raised his head in a silent howl, the gesture seeming to transcend mere animal behavior to become something profound: acknowledgement, benediction, farewell. The ranger's truck navigated the damaged road with careful precision. Hope settled between Emily and Robert in the back seat, her intelligent eyes taking in this new chapter with cautious optimism. As they rounded the final bend that would take Max from their sight, Emily allowed herself one last look at the magnificent creature framed against his mountain domain. "Goodbye," she whispered, the word carrying a decade of love, separation, and the profound joy of this unexpected reunion. "Thank you for remembering us." The weeks following their return from the preserve brought a deceptive resurgence in Robert's condition. The adventure seemed to have kindled something vital within him, a renewed purpose that temporarily masked his body's continued decline. He threw himself into documenting their extraordinary experience, working with Emily to record every detail of Max's wilderness adaptation and the remarkable bonds that had endured a decade of separation. This matters, he insisted during late-night sessions at the kitchen table, oxygen tank humming quietly beside him. What we witness challenges fundamental assumptions about rehabilitation, about the capacity for emotional memory in animals returned to wilderness settings. Emily supported these efforts wholeheartedly, recognizing that the work provided her father with purpose during his diminishing days. Together they compiled photographic evidence, behavioral observations, and their personal testimonies into a comprehensive record that would eventually form the foundation of the Thompson Foundation's revised rehabilitation philosophy. Hope's integration proceeded with remarkable smoothness. The preserve's Conservation Ambassador program provided structured training that honored her dual nature, wild-born yet human-connected. Emily visited regularly, maintaining the bridge Max had deliberately established between his wilderness family and the humans who had shaped his early development. By late autumn, the temporary resurgence in Robert's health began its inevitable retreat. His good days grew fewer, the periods of clarity shorter, as his body gradually surrendered to the progressive disease. Yet even as physical strength diminished, a profound peace seemed to settle over him, the contentment of someone who had completed his life's essential work and fulfilled his deepest wish. On a crisp November evening, with the first dusting of snow transforming the mountain landscape, Robert asked to be moved to the porch swing he had built when Emily was still a child. Bundled against the cold, supplemental oxygen flowing steadily, he gazed toward the distant ridgeline where Max roamed free. "I've been thinking about something," he told Emily, who sat beside him, her hand covering his. About what conservation really means. It's not just about preserving wilderness spaces or saving endangered species. It's about honoring connections, the invisible threads that bind all living things into something greater than individual survival. Emily nodded, recognizing the culmination of philosophy that had guided her father's life work. "That's what Max showed us, isn't it? That the boundaries we create between wild and domestic, between animal and human family, are more permeable than we imagined." Exactly. Robert's weathered face creased in a smile. Max lives fully in his wild nature, yet carried something of us with him all these years. Hope bridges both worlds by design. Neither diminishes the other, they exist in relationship, in balance. As darkness settled over the mountains, Robert's breathing grew more labored, but his spirit remained peaceful. Michael joined them on the porch, the three Thompsons together in quiet communion as they had been during those extraordinary days in the preserve. "I want the foundation to continue this work," Robert said after a companionable silence. "Not just rehabilitation for release, but honoring the complex relationships that formed during that process. The connections matter, they're part of the healing." It was his final directive for the organization he had built, a vision born from personal experience and profound understanding of the complex interplay between human compassion and wild dignity. That night, with his children beside him and his gaze fixed on the mountains where Max led his wilderness family, Robert Thompson slipped peacefully from life, but his mission complete, his legacy secured. Spring arrived with its eternal promise of renewal, transforming the Thompson property with vibrant life that seemed a fitting tribute to Robert's enduring influence. The memorial service had been held months earlier, a gathering of family, friends, and conservation colleagues celebrating a life dedicated to healing broken creatures and restoring them to their natural dignity. Now, with winter's grip finally loosening, Emily faced the future her father had envisioned. The Thompson Animal Rehabilitation Foundation continued its essential work under Emily's guidance. Its mission subtly expanded to incorporate the wisdom gained from their extraordinary reunion with Max. The Thompson Continuum, as it became known in wildlife rehabilitation circles, acknowledged the complex emotional connections formed during rehabilitation while still prioritizing successful wilderness reintegration. became the living embodiment of this philosophy. Now fully grown into her role as conservation ambassador, she divided her time between educational programs that taught children about wildlife preservation and regular visits to the preserve where her father and siblings maintained their wilderness territory. Though never fully domestic nor completely wild, she navigated both worlds with confident grace, a testament to the vision Robert had articulated in his final days. On the anniversary of their wilderness reunion, Emily made a private pilgrimage to the preserve. With proper permissions and accompanied by Hope, she hiked to a designated observation point overlooking the valley where Max's pack was known to range. The journey was both tribute and closure, honoring the extraordinary bond that had transcended a decade of separation while acknowledging that some connections endure beyond physical proximity. As sunset painted the mountains in amber hues reminiscent of Max's intelligent eyes, Emily felt a profound sense of completion. Her father's legacy continued in the Foundation's expanding work, in the revised rehabilitation protocols now adopted by conservation organizations nationwide, and in Hope's unique role bridging wilderness and human understanding. From the valley below, a distant howl echoed through the gathering dusk, deep, resonant, unmistakably Max. The sound carried across the wilderness he had claimed as his domain, reaching Emily like a greeting across the carefully maintained distance that honored his wild sovereignty. Hope answered with her own voice, the communication between father and daughter transcending the artificial boundaries humans so often imposed on the natural world. In that moment, Emily understood with perfect clarity what her father had recognized in his final days. True conservation wasn't about rigid separation between human and wild, but about responsible stewardship of the connections that inevitably form between them. Max had thrived in the wilderness precisely because he carried something of his human family within him, not as limitation but as expansion of his magnificent nature. As darkness settled over the mountains, Emily turned toward home, Hope moving confidently at her side. The Thompson legacy continued in this balanced relationship, in the Foundation's evolving work, and in the wilderness where Max led his pack with the intelligence and compassion that had made him extraordinary in any context. The connections remain, Emily whispered to the gathering stars, words meant for her father, for Max, for all those who had shaped the journey that brought her to this moment of understanding. They were never broken, just transformed. And somewhere in the darkness of his mountain kingdom, Max continued his wilderness life, separate yet connected, wild yet remembering, the perfect embodiment of a rehabilitation mission fulfilled beyond anyone's expectations. Save perhaps those of a little girl who had always believed in the power of bonds that transcended time, distance, and the artificial boundaries between worlds. As the years pass and life etches its marks upon our hearts, the bonds we form remain our greatest treasure. Emily and Robert's journey with Max reminds us that love transcends time, distance, and even the boundaries we create between our world and the wild. Some connections never truly break, they simply transform. Like Max, who carried his human family in his heart while leading his pack with dignity, we too carry those we've loved through every season of our lives. Their absence becomes a different kind of presence. The most profound gifts we leave behind aren't material possessions, but the relationships we nurture and the values we embody. Robert's legacy lived on through Emily's continuation of his work, through Hope's bridge between worlds, and through Max's remarkable memory of those who once showed him kindness. In our autumn years, we discover that what matters most isn't how much wilderness we've conquered, but how well we've loved, how completely we've forgiven, and how courageously we've faced life's storms together. The invisible threads that connect us remain unbroken, weaving through generations, honoring what was while embracing what could be. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.